Well, thank you. I appreciate being offered a chance to talk at this conference. I guess the question is, where do new MRI coils come from? And I think as we'll see, an innovative coil design or technology is just a start. It's a first step of a long journey. Translation into a clinically approved product is a complex and expensive process, though ultimately commercial availability is a requirement for a widespread adoption of a new product. I guess start with what makes a successful MRI coil. And I think this can be broken down into a few basic groups. One, you need a realizable product. This is not a one-of-a-kind built by an expert, but a clinically approved manufacturable device. Product itself isn't all there is. You need an application. You need an application which is enabled by the product. S&R G factors are useful, but ultimately the thing needs to provide better, faster imaging, more accurate diagnosis, perhaps a scientific application. Ultimately, why is someone going to buy this product? Once you have your application, you need to look at the market for that application and kind of look at other aspects. Are there competing products? Is your 256 channel really better than your 32 or 64 channel coil? Is 5% improvement really worth 5 times the cost? Don't want to forget about other competing imaging modalities. Interventional MR has always had a hard time because it has to compete against relatively inexpensive fluoroscopy and ultrasound. The one thing I've seen that makes a huge difference is when a new product really shows information that is unobtainable by any other means. And this is particularly the case in MR. You could see MS lesions that were invisible on a CT. I think you can make the same argument for 7T as well. This product plus application plus market ultimately needs to generate a viable business. And the sine qua non of business is revenue has to exceed expenses. That inequality does not hold, you don't have a business. Let's think a little bit about what starts a coil development, what initiates it. In some cases, a customer comes to you and says, I want an X, can you make it? I think oftentimes in research labs and academic centers, you actually come up with a new coil technology. And you have to look for an application for this new type of coil to make a good body coil, good head coil. The other way it's typically done, certainly how we've done things at Nova, is you first look at your application and market for that application, better, faster brain imaging. And you develop technology to meet that goal. Say better element geometry, better electronics. Now you have your concept, you need a prototype, proof of principle. Simulations are helpful, but you need to build a device, a testable device. You oftentimes start with phantom testing, which can give you some indication of the performance, but ultimately you need human data to demonstrate your application. And even if it's a prototype coil, you still need to be concerned with safety. And normally this device needs to meet all that requirements that a finished clinically approved product does. And particularly you need to think about passive traps, valence, conductor patient spacing. In some cases, a better quality prototype can itself be the end product, a so-called custom coil. Now you have your prototype, you need to translate it into a manufacturable, clinically approved device. First question you have to ask is, how many are you gonna make? You're gonna make 10 of these or 1,000 of them? And that leads a lot in terms of how you're going to make it. Do you need new processes, new fixtures, new equipment? What type of employee training do you need? You need to have a product that's manufacturable. If you have to make 10 to get one that works, that doesn't work very well. As a medical device, you also need to look at usability. Is this gonna be comfortable? Is it gonna fit most patients? Is it too heavy to carry? I think one of the distinguishing characteristics between custom prototypes and clinically approved devices is the mechanical integrity of the housing. Is this going to withstand the typical use in the MR environment? Is it going to be easy to use? Of course, reliability is critical as well. Something that works once or twice, it has to go back to the company for repair. That doesn't work so well. Any medical device, you have to look at safety. And not only is the coil going to be safe under typical operating conditions, is it going to be safe under first fault conditions, such as a broken cable or a bad detuning circuit? Safety you can evaluate in terms of risk analysis. And in particular, you'll need to show that you mitigated all foreseeable risk as far as possible. While not necessarily part of the coil design itself, you got to look at labeling, instructions for use. These are important, and actually in some cases can be used to mitigate risk. Once you have your coil, you're going to need to do some verification, and particularly you're going to have to do some coil integration testing on the scanner. Does it work? And particularly you need to look at the safety, such as temperature testing, maybe the performance as well, SNR tests. All MR vendors have their own requirements, and to sell the coil on their scanners, you typically need to show them that you meet these requirements. Moreover, there's international medical device standards, such as IEC 60601 and IEC 60601 2-33, which is MR specific. There's a lot of country-specific variations as well. Some of these standards don't necessarily immediately apply to the MR industry, but yet the coil will still need to meet these, in particular creepage and clearance, ball drop tests, biocompatibility. These are all essential. And most of the time you end up having a nationally recognized test lab to certify the product to meet these standards. All these translation activities, they give you an awful lot of documentation. And these go into a device master record, which will control how the device is built. Once you've done all of this, of course, you still need to go back to the application. Maybe some validation here. Do you still have the required performance? Have you traded something off in terms of performance to meet one of these standards? And yes, this translation is very expensive. And oftentimes is the reason why prototypes never make it past that stage. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars here. An MRI coil is a medical device, and you need to look at the regulatory side of the coil, particularly medical device approvals. All of your design and manufacturing needs to take place under a quality management system, ISO 13485, GMP, or equivalent. This is a very large set of internal quality procedures, which covers many company operations, everything from part purchases to post-marketing surveillance. The system will be audited by external auditors, such as notified bodies, to ensure you have compliance to these standards. Of course, the FDA, if you're building for the US market, can come in at any time. European device approvals take place through a CE mark. This involves a couple of different pathways, but always has a technical file, notified bodies, and an authorized representative. US market is covered by the FDA, which involves a 510K application. FDA has a lot of experience with MR coils, and your application will be carefully reviewed. Oftentimes you use consultants to help these very complex applications. There are other markets as well. Some of these kind of fall a little bit along the CE mark, but have many cases, such as Japan, have their own kind of system, which you also have to take into consideration. Ultimately, to get a device approved worldwide is a very expensive process. Once you have your new approved medical device, new MRI coil, well, you got to make it. And here is where manufacturability really comes into play. In particular, you need to have quality and reproducibility. Is the first unit and the 100th unit going to be the same? In the end, all your documentation, your procedures, and test acceptance criteria, and your training are tested by this. And do they actually lead to building a quality product? Sometimes things don't go right, and you need to have procedures to fix problems, which is part of your quality management system, such as control of non-conforming product, corrective actions, engineering change orders. As a medical device, typically each MRI coil you build will have its own device history file, which are manufacturing records. And yeah, you need to keep track of all the batches of components you used. If some diodes are bad, you have a bad lot of diodes, you need to find out where all those diodes went and what products were involved. A lot of times you will do some things will be outsourced, such as housings and PCB boards. In some cases, you can actually have the whole coil contract manufactured, though that's typically much more expensive. Well, now you have your warehouse full of MRI coils that you're excited about, but now you need to generate some revenue to pay all the expenses. And this is done, of course, through sales. This is where application and your market really come into play. What's going to drive a customer to purchase this new coil? no matter how wonderful and great your coil is, it will require some marketing. How are people going to find out about this product? Maybe they need a little convincing to look at it or to try it out. Depending on what market you're specifically looking at, there's a number of different avenues here. Customer support is also involved, and that's just not sales, it's also installation, it's troubleshooting, it's repairs, coil file upgrades, user training. End of the day, you need to get paid. And getting payment, some cases, is its own art in and of itself. Well, now you have all these sales of this great device, very successful. You may find that someone else would like to make something similar, maybe for a little bit less. How do you protect yourself? One of the first things that comes to mind is patents. Patents in the MR coil business are a little tricky. I think they're typically more used as a defensive posture than, say, stopping infringers. I think just as important as patents are proprietary know-how, your manufacturing methods, trade secrets. You always keep ahead of the competition, new models, innovative technology. And I think more important than anything else is your business reputation. Are you making a quality product? Are you taking care of your customers? I will talk a little bit now about the business model, various business models you have for the MR coil industry. As we discussed, sometimes you have custom coils. You basically have a high quality prototype and you get to skip some of these translation steps that we've talked about. Many individuals have done this successfully. Sometimes these companies have made good business with this. More often you have direct customer sales to hospitals and universities. This has higher margins, but does require more marketing and installation expenses and customer support. Another route is original equipment manufacturers, such as Siemens and GE. This involves lower margins. They will charge for selling the product, but it does lead to oftentimes much higher volumes. And in fact, most successful MR companies, it's kind of a combination of typically direct sales plus OEM work. Bringing innovative coil design to market requires multiple different activities. And in the end, everything is done by people. And a company, how it hires its people, how it trains and retains employees is absolutely critical. No employees, no product, no company. In addition, you have to look at the business's relationship with its customers, suppliers, the MR vendors, and the medical community at large. In the end, companies are great forces for good, and that's an important aspect of their success. You also need a vision behind the company. Turning an idea into a successful business is quite a challenge, and this is, of course, the essence of entrepreneurship. I want to talk a little bit about funding. Raising capital is always a fundamental aspect of business. Successful companies often self-fund themselves. You take the money you've made from one product and use that to develop the next. If you're just getting started, of course, it's a little more difficult. In many cases, customers are actually a good source of funds. They can provide down payments or pay for so-called non-recurring engineering costs. The government can help. SBIR grants can get something started, as well as they can provide SBA loans. When you think of funding, we often think of venture capital. Though typically MR coil companies are a little smaller than the type of things that venture capitalists like to fund. The one company actually got started with some funding from capital markets. I think it's important to mention angel investors. These are people who specialize in early stage companies. They can not only just provide funding, but they also can provide some business expertise as well. There have been cases where the MR vendor themselves will provide capital, particularly if they think you can help them manufacture their products. In conclusion, a new coil design is like a seed, and only under the right conditions will it develop into a useful product. As we've seen, there's many pitfalls, and relatively few new designs will ever make it to market. I think one of the driving forces for Nova Medical was my experience that many potential products with really vital medical applications were never being used to benefit patient care. While there are many steps involved, innovative products drive improved medical care. And of course, this is the ultimate goal. Thank you.